This is just a quick video to show these kind of vertical, we call them sort of green wall self-wicking containers really, or green wall planters. But what I've got here, it's a 25 litre container. I've cut the top off, I've drilled holes in the bottom. I've used the second container to make a reservoir at the base, which is filled up through this little filler here. I'm going to use a PET bottle as a kind of funnel just because I've got wood chip around the base. There's not much going on in there, so I'm just trying to sort of disguise that and then have more planting up the sides. This is a new one, so it hasn't been planted long. It's only got a few cuttings in there. I just started doing that today. And the top, I quite like this. It's what they call sort of a Mexican hat plant. So it has these lovely big tall, sort of almost like flower spikes, but it's very easy to propagate, so you can take a little bit off there and then grow it. And this is really sort of cascading over the sides of that container quite nicely. That's been planted a couple of months, I think. What I've got here, so I've got various containers here. You can see the reservoir on this one. On the later ones I started drilling holes in the reservoir itself and planting straight in. Planting to the top of the reservoir, that determines the maximum height of the water level. So these plants have got a little bit of space to root in there, and I think it's quite nice having that aeration, and so they're not standing in water, but I'm not too worried about those plants. What I'm really trying to do is sort of circulate the water through. I use that, I can propagate from those and then sort of have more sort of colonisation with this sort of green wall containers elsewhere on the allotment. So you can disguise things like water butts as the plants get established, and these are portable as well, so you can sort of move those around for almost like an instant sort of hedge. This one's established longer, so the plants have all knitted together really nicely. I've got mixes of sedums and then the ivy leaf, can't think what it's called now, ivy leaf toe flax, and that's quite nice. It's flowering in there, but it's made a really nice sort of dense, densely knitted together sort of roots and knotted around there. So it's really filling in, and that makes runners as well, so it's easy to propagate from, and I think that works really well. What I'm trying to do is sort of tend towards more green manures now. When I started doing this, I was just using it for the sort of visual aspect to sort of screen, but I think there's actually a crop you can grow from this as well. I've heard that this is actually, what am I growing now? I can't, lucerne, crimson clovers, alfalfa. I'm sort of started growing those in trays on top, and I just think it's nice to have a bit more sort of diversity in terms of what's planting. But this one here, it's quite nice now. It's up to sort of top of my sort of hip now, so it's nice and tall. And I've added a few containers and I've started sort of moving those alongside. But what I wanted to do, where I've got compost bins on the allotment, just have these sort of screening them. And it looks a bit sparse now because, as I said, these ones are all sort of just planted earlier today, so I've only got a few cuttings in. These ones were trailing, but I've kind of cut those back. But I think it works quite well, and even with the sparse planting, it makes quite a nice sort of screen, quite a nice feature really. And again, I'm kind of growing different plants in top, mainly sedums because they're easy to grow. They give you a nice sort of display with the variegation. That they flower for pollinators as well. But I think I'll sort of start moving in towards more of the sort of green manures as well, because then you can harvest from that and then sort of straight back into the beds. These ones, that one's got a reservoir. So there's a reservoir here, planter reservoir, and around the base I'm using the ones without the carbon black, so they are needs a bit of protection from ultraviolet. So what I've done here, I've mounted up the wood chip on the path so they're sort of set in, and then it's just the black containers which look a bit more discreet, I think, especially when they're just getting sort of established. I don't know if this one's got it, but I'll just take the top off so you can see that is just the base of one of those 25 litre containers. There's some worms disappearing into the holes there, which is nice to see. I've topped this one up with wood chip and part broken down material, but I can't remember if I've done that on this one. Yeah, there's a soil feeding station in the centre too. And I'm making those bigger on the later sort of on the newer ones I've done, and you can see that material is breaking down, so it's sort of feeding back into the plants. It's quite a lot of roots, which is surprising. But on the other ones, I want to kind of have a core of which are almost like interchangeable. So what you can do is once the carcass need to be harvested, you can kind of take that section out and then put fresh material in there. So in a way, it's sort of feeding those plants through the worm activity, soil activity in there. But the plants themselves, these containers will settle down during the season. So I'm adding more material on there. But I think what I'll do is almost have maybe half the capacity as soil feeding station. Then there's only a sort of thin amount of sort of substrate for the plants, but that's sufficient for that amount of greenery. But then it gives you the sort of inbuilt feature of almost like continuous flow wormery, so you can actually sort of push that out. You can lift the container up and you can harvest it through a hole in the base of the container. So the substrate is just like a kind of little sort of cylinder around the edge, and it's got that core of sort of a vermicompost. So this works quite well. These containers have got holes in the base, so the worms will move through, and then they'll sort of aerate that material as well, which is quite nice. So it just it benefits those plants, and it helps moisture from sort of leaking around, and from the container itself. The plants will, to an extent as well, they'll sort of stop the evaporation from the soil, and it should be quite a nice little sort of growing setup really. But I do like the fact that you can replenish the compost without having to replant as well, which is quite nice. But yeah, what I'll do is every time I go past that place, I'll pick up maybe 6 or 8 of those containers, and then this here, that's base part of the container. The top of the container I can make into one of these troughs, and then I make a reservoir out the base of one. No, actually, the reservoir, that's out the base, and then that one's out the top. This one's, or what, it's kind of work in progress, but these ones, that's the base. I've got a filler in here, but on this one here, you can see there's a red lid of the container, little screw top cap, and that's got a hole drilled in it, and then there's a pipe that goes up, so there's an overflow here. But it just means that you can kind of utilize all the containers and you're not disposing any material, so it's still using the cap as well, which is quite nice. So it's all being reused. So there wasn't any cost in actually making these, but there was cost in time, how long it actually took to put together. Although saying that, there's a few little plumbing fittings, but they're very, very cheap. And you can see that works as the sort of overflow as well. I need to I've got some more elbows, but I really want to kind of get those all in black, because I think they look a bit more discreet. I've got some of these ones with, although these are set in the ground now, but yeah, with the white, and they sort of stand out a bit. So that's it for now. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I think having the, I mean, if you imagine that's like a 4-foot square bed, but just growing vertically, and the footprint that I've lost out by having the containers, you're still planting that in the top, so you haven't actually lost out on anything. You've just gained that 4 feet of space, which is quite nice. In this case as well, it's where a compost bin is, I'm sort of growing up on the back face of these as well. I haven't planted into those gaps, but you can plant into there, you can plant into that. You can even plant in through the little holes I've added to sort of lift these up. But yeah, really quite excited about these. I think they'll be good, and it's one of these ongoing kind of things that you can develop. And at some point what I'll need to do is get some proper posts in, because obviously these are tall and they do need a little bit of retaining. If I was building these into a bank, I'd put a bit of a batter onto it, so they'd be sort of angled back, so it bears the weight onto the bank behind it, or the compost bin behind it. But it's easy enough to get some steel tubes or something, or scaffold tubes, and then get some, I don't know, M6 screw eyes, and put some decent galvanized wire across, and then that's not going to go anywhere. But these haven't fallen over. What I'd have noticed is, as the compost settles down, you want to lift them up and just put a bit of fresh wood chip or something in there, just to keep them sort of vertical. But I'm enjoying this bit of the garden. It's a bit of the allotment, but it's more like the sort of garden part of this, and it's sort of experimental, which appeals as well. So as I said before in a previous video, I've got the composter here. This is sort of hot compost, and I'm using that to disguise the side of that bin. But if you imagine if that was on a wider area, you could really lose sort of water butts IBCs, all kinds of wormeries and things behind that. And what I've got here, I like to sort of use areas for sort of more than one purpose. So I'm propagating plants on the tops of here. These are reclaimed. I'm using these as sort of capillary trays. They're old storage trays from the school where I work. They're throwing them out. They're from the science department. They'll eventually degrade with the ultraviolet light, but I think I've already had about 3 years use out of them. They're not showing any signs of wear or tear. And what I've done slightly differently, this is reclaimed acrylic. I've made larger sheets that lip over to the edge, and then I've got the perforated polythene on top, so that will cover the container as well. And I'm kind of looking to even mulching on here with wood chip as well, because that stops the evaporation a little bit, and it's quite nice because the plants will nestle down to that wood chip and they'll get a really nice capillary action through the bases of the pots as well. So that you don't need to water these barely at all, if even that. Especially, I mean, it's been really wet lately, so these are topped up. But it's really nice. And what is nice as well, I've started putting biochar actually in the capillary trays, and even wood chip as well. So you'll get worms in there, and the worms will come up into the pots and they'll aerate the compost in the pots, and in turn sort of feed the plants, but stops the plants from getting sort of root bound as well. And sometimes you can just pull the occasional weed out and it comes out really quite easily, because the soil's actually got some structure. It's not just compacted. But underneath here I've got the I can't think what these are called. These are the canna worms wormeries. I picked these up for nothing, just locally through Free Cycle. I don't know what's going on. I haven't really paid much attention to these, but it's just an expansion of the masses of worm habitat that I'm building on the allotment here. So as you can see, yeah, that's full of worms. I've got some old brushed cotton bedding. Yeah, so that's doing really fine. Perfectly good. Don't need wood chip in there. Loads and loads of worms, all sorts of different sizes. Got some really small ones that are sort of not quite wisps, but they're obviously breeding, and then some of these bigger worms. And then underneath here I've just got loads and loads of wood chip as well. And this is all sort of wood chip. And that's actually warm. Yeah, and you can see this is breaking down really nice as well. So all this wood chip here makes a really good soak away for any excess leachate in the bin, but in return that leachate will help to break down the wood chip. There's surprisingly little worms in here, but I think what you've got is because there's so much ready source of food here. I've got these, I think that's three stacked tall. That one's, what's that? It's 4, but I've got a lid on that one. I'm just using plywood for these. And then that container there, that's a massive great big worm bed as well. And that's about 500 mil deep, and I've got 25 litre containers in there to make it easier to harvest. But then what's quite nice as well, all the kind of junk you need on allotment, watering cans, the kind of potting up benches, club hammers for knocking posts in and stuff, I've got those there, and it just gives you a shelf as well. But as you see, you've got really productive use of that underneath as well. And this is just an old steel table just from work, and I got some reclaimed buffalo board from a scaffold yard. And what's quite nice, it's made a little sort of step up there, and I've got more of the capillary trays up on top there. And then the other side of it, if you can see, there's some duckweed there. That's like a kind of plunge tank for the watering cans, but it's quite nice to have a little bit of water on the allotment as well. So I've got a shelf in there and a little ramp, so hedgehogs and things can climb out fairly easily. And there's a lot of plants as well, so they can kind of climb up and grab hold, and sort of natural sort of slug control that way. There's an apple tree on there. The fruit, the windfall, I just pop straight in, and I think it's quite nice. Although these aren't by any means the best design of wormery, it's an additional kind of space. See, there's not condensation on there still, but there's no worms actually crawling up, because they've got enough to do, keep them busy in there. I don't know if I can see in there. Yeah, you can see sort of worms hanging down in there, hanging around. And I'll try and put that back. That's back, and then I'll just put the lid on. And then, I don't know, just use an old concrete, again, reclaimed block from someone's driveway just to sit the lid on there so it's nice and secure. But if you've got a limited amount of space, or well, even if you've got lots of space, it makes sense to really maximise that use. And I think this is good because that space there, I can move this, make that into a bed maybe next year, because there'll be a really nice depth of soil already. It's right by the plunge tank as well, and then I can kind of keep sort of moving this along. So you're building soil at the same time, and you're using that for, you've got potential bed being prepared, wormery, so worm habitat, containers, so you can really utilise that material and transport it around. I've got a reclaimed buffalo board shelf there as well, so I've got that for storage. You could even put another shelf halfway down, but then on here, even these wormeries here, I could put more wormeries on top of that, make that wormery really, really deep. And then you've got another shelf there with another level of growing, so I haven't actually lost out any growing space by having this. And then I've got multiple uses sort of down right into the soil itself. And if you imagine that all the clay under there is being worked continuously by those worms, so you're not preparing a bed, you're not spending time to prepare it, the worms are doing that while you can do other things, which is a really good use of time, I think. And these, why I kind of just obviously enjoy growing plants, so this is it's nice to see. I've got some ferns on there, it's not the best place, but it's still doing okay because it's got that capillary tray underneath. And this is the plunge tank there. That's just an old sort of formal water feature thing, you know, one of those bubblers with the stones. So I actually picked up a greenhouse, and that was in the back garden. They're moving into this new house, and I still wanted it, and I thought, yeah, it's perfectly good. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do with that, but I just sort of set that in. And then again, I've got compost here in these containers, but now I'm growing green manures on top as well. So it's work in progress, but it's new sort of ideas, new ways of maximising the space, which is nice. And then, yeah, this is the sort of area with the containers, the green wall containers and the green roof containers on the compost bin as for the previous video. Once again, thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something, and I'd really recommend just trying to make areas for vermicomposting on your garden space or your grow space, rather than looking at wormeries as a little tiny thing you have in the corner by the back of the shed or whatever, with a limited amount of capacity. If you start using reclaimed materials to build your own sort of containers, and just sort of think, okay, I've got a lot of wood chip here, I've got lots of leaf material, I've got kitchen waste, start sort of composting in situ. Look at things like hugelkultur, where you're just using timber to build structure in the soil, so you provide sort of aeration in the soil and favourable conditions for soil life. And then you can do all your conventional growing. You can grow in compost on top, you can grow in containers on top, but whilst that's all happening during the growing season, you're really getting something for almost like something for nothing. It's just that initial sort of investment of time just to get the organic matter in. And with large compost bins and things like that, because you've got the heat, you don't have to worry about rodents, because there'll be too much heat for any rodents to go in. It's quite easy to get lots of organic matter all in one go. You can just, if you've got friends in the street, you can just knock on their door and say, oh, I'm just trying to get some, sort of build some soil, and on the allotment, could I just collect some of the kitchen waste from your caddies? I've got my own container, I can just empty it out, maybe set a certain day, beat the council to it, and then collect their stuff. I do it through neighbours you get on fairly well with, because then you can limit the amount of stuff you're composting. Obviously a bin like this will take loads of meat, food waste, even human manure. I'm not doing that on the allotment, but you can look into that. Obviously with human manure, you need to give that an additional sort of maturation sort of stage as well, and I wouldn't recommend putting it on food crops. I haven't got experience of using it myself, but I'd use that for ornamental plants, and even for green manures. So you could cycle it through another stage of potentially to kind of destroy any potential pathogens that are in there. But there's lots of literature available on it. There's lots of people that have used it successfully. But I think for that you need a bit more space. You need multiple bays, and you need to be quite methodical in terms of how you compost, And you had to have some experience composting, so you know about compost heat, you know about cover materials to sort of stop not vermin but rodents and things from getting in. And then you want to have loads and load of wood chip as well. You want to make sure it's raised up so it's not going to go a potential runoff into any water courses and things like that. But if you're looking into that anyway, I kind of assume you're already experienced at composting. But these, you can compost roadkill and things, you can compost pigeons, and that's really, really hot and they'll break down really fast. I'm using these likewise, the same as the black containers here, the white containers, to subdivide and compartmentalise the compost heaps as well. I think this is quite deep. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see anything on this here, but yeah, you can just see, you can see that container there. So in theory, once this is ready to harvest, that's really quite nice. There's really loads of air in it, which is quite good. It's quite wood chippy, and I'm going to put some more brewer's waste on there later today. But the idea is you'll be able to pull out that whole 25-litre container. Rather than digging this material out, it's already in containers, so you can put one of those in a wheelbarrow it to where you want. If you want to put it into a worm bed, you can even lift the container up and then just drop the container as it is straight into the worm bed. So lots of ideas here. It's all straightforward, but it's things I've worked with that have been really quite successful. So I'd like to try and encourage others to use some of these methods. Thank you.